Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. It's 3:30 European Central Time. Uh, it's good afternoon for some of you. It's good morning for others. We are so pleased that so many people are attending today. I think we have, when I last checked, we had attendees from all over the world. I'm joined by Peter, managing partner of Big Business Agency. I know, Peter, you're going to introduce yourself later on in the presentation.
Yeah.
I,
Hi.
Hi, Peter. I am Morten. I'm going to take you through the first part of the introduction. I'm head of account-based marketing at Law Creative. We are around 50 people in the UK, business-to-business advertising and marketing agency, helping our clients win the future. The topics of today, as far as I'm concerned, is an introduction to ABM. What is it, ABM? What does it do for your business? Why has ABM become a main strategy? My background is 20 years in business-to-business advertising, mainly on the agency side, but also been on the client side. I started working with ABM in 2017, and I've been involved in numerous projects, both global projects and EMEA. And I've seen ABM moving from being a niche strategy for certain companies to becoming a key strategy for growth, especially in times of uncertainty. And at last year's annual global conference on ABM, uh, there was evidence that more than 60% of UK-based B2B companies are now working with ABM and seeing that as a major go-to-market strategy. Just like when you're flying on low-cost airlines, the coffee is virtual. We will email you the presentation. Please use the chat. We'll take questions and answers at the end. And if the platform hasn't done it, we ask you to mute. Next, please. So let me just introduce you to ABM. And if I am to just give you one sentence that hopefully says this all, is this one: do not count the companies you reach, but reach the companies that count. So instead of doing everything for everybody, the whole idea about ABM is doing something for those accounts or companies that really matters, that are really critical to your business. A more formal definition of ABM is that it's a strategic approach. So it's not a campaign, it's a strategy. And it's about, as I said, designing and executing super targeted, personalized activities. And it's about sales and marketing working together. So there's, as far as I'm concerned, seen from my point of view, there's one thing I want you to remember from my slides. I'm sure Peter has another view, is that sales and marketing must work together if you want to do ABM. If you're not, my best advice is if you cannot get sales and marketing aligned, do not do ABM. ABM is about driving pipeline and engagement with named accounts. We talk about the 3 R's: reputation, revenue, and relationship. I often get asked, when is ABM relevant? And if you can tick those 4 boxes here, I would say ABM is something for you. And actually, at the end of the presentation, we will have an offer for you where we have a tool that will score you on your readiness for ABM. And Peter and I will be delighted to take you through it. But the deal size is substantial. The decision-making process is long and complicated. Lots of people involved, both as decision makers or influencers, and the business environment is competitive. And I believe that if you are in B2B today, you will probably say yes to all of these. I sometimes get asked, what is a substantial deal size? And I would think anything above 50,000 euros and so on, that then you should consider account-based marketing. The 80-20 rule is not new, but in many ways, the 80-20 rules is a kind of back burner for account-based marketing. So it's about spending your sales and marketing on the accounts with the biggest potential. And if you're like me, who travel a lot, you sometimes walk through airports and you see posters advertising for B2B companies. And I always think, well, what a waste of money, because you have such a waste. With ABM, it's different. You're actually not fishing with a net, you're fishing with a spear. And if you take the 80-20 rules and relate that to your ABM strategy, then we are recommending a kind of a tiered approach that will help you focus on the most important and business critical accounts. So at the top, we have ABM as a one-to-one. That is typically between 1 to 10 accounts you pick. These accounts are your mission critical, must win or must defend customers. 1 to few is between 10 and 50 accounts. They are also highly individualized campaigns. So you have individual advertising, you have individual landing pages, your outreach is personalized to a high degree. And typically your one-to-one or your one-to-few accounts will probably represent 60 to 80% of your businesses. At the bottom, you have one-to-many, which typically are between 50 to 200 named accounts. And you could use a one-to-many strategy to detect which of your potential customers are relevant for you and which of them should you move up to the next level, the one-to-few, and eventually to one-to-one. At the recent ABM conference in London in early November, there was a presentation by a German industrial giant, 148-year-old company, and they had taken the strategy of moving from one to few and then one to one. One to one can also be if you are in a position where you are having a bid or a tender, then you may zoom in on that particular account and making sure that all of your decision makers and all of your influencers are aware of your value proposition. So that's one of the key questions you should ask yourself when you're developing your strategy. Do we want to do a one-to-one or one-to-few? I'm sure that Peter later on will talk about, once we have engaged with them, created your awareness and made your value proposition relevant to you, how do you actually close the deals? What drives ABM and what has moved ABM from being this niche strategy I talked about earlier on and towards a growth enabler? Again, at the conference early November, there's clear signs that ABM is seen as a growth enabler because you have a higher probability of higher revenue with the bigger accounts, and bigger accounts also tends to be more resilient to any uncertainties and we have plenty of those around. So we typically meet these 6 issues. You've got poor quality leads, you have insufficient pipeline or no pipeline or pipeline from the wrong companies. The digital buying journey is a big factor in ABM, and I'll share with you in a minute some statistics and updates on the digital buying journey. Connected to that is the fact that too many people are involved in the buying process, and sales have a hard time just reaching all of them. Then there's the 80-20 rule, and finally the sales and marketing alignment, where unfortunately we still see that sales are in one silo and marketing in another one, and we want you to work together. We want you to be in the same room. We want you to share the same objectives. And that is a critical, but also a very rewarding part of ABM, that you get sales and marketing to talk to each other and agree on a strategy. So just a little bit about the customer journey. These are fresh data from early November, provided by the agency or the company Sixth Sense. Big study, global study, saying that half of younger buyers will include 10 or more external influencers in their purchase. 69% of the customer journey is now anonymous. And that means that whenever you want to reach out, it doesn't matter, because they will reach the customers. The buying customer will reach out when they are ready. They evaluate typically between 4 to 5 vendors, and they have a lot of interactions for that journey. The figure 860 was mentioned. So, and an interaction can be an email opening, website download, website visit, webinar attendance, lots of different interactions. But 80% of the contact is buyer initiated. And the journey has kind of 2 steps. The first 70% is about choosing, and the last 30% is validation. And the final fact that was revealed during the conference was that when people start looking for a vendor, they have an initial list, and typically 3 to 4 or 5 companies. And very often, one of those 4 or 5 companies will be the winner. And if you consider in any given time that 5% of your total ICP is right now in the market, the other 95% are not in the market, then it makes so much sense that you have to have a digital presence towards those 95% who are right now not in the market but are coming in the market. And when they start searching and start going on this long customer journey, which sometimes takes up to 2 years, you should be there in front of those buying companies. And that is what ABM is all about. My favorite slide explaining what is ABM and what is the benefit is closely related to what I just talked about, the digital customer journey. And having worked with some of the biggest B2B brands in the world, I've never come across a company that have unlimited sales resources. I'm sure Peter will also cover this. So typically sales maybe interact with 4 to 10 decision makers and influencers, but behind them are users, experts, technical decision makers, commercial decision makers. And what actually ABM actually does is we are able, using different targeting techniques, to send your value proposition in front of these people in a highly personalized way. And I guess that is the biggest benefit of, if you do not consider closing the deals benefit, but in terms of marketing, that we can reach the decision makers and influencers that you wouldn't do in a traditional marketing campaign. So when you're having the dialogue with your sales team, ask them how many people do they know, how many people know them, what are their functions, and a discussion we're also having internally in the industry is now forgetting about the terminology MQL, marketing qualified lead, and instead look at MQA, the marketing qualified account. So what is your total engagement with a particular company? How many of those decision makers, influencers do you actually have in your CRM, and how many of those are you interacting with? That will, in the future, be a key KPI for doing ABM. Talked a little bit about the strategy, one-to-one, one-to-few, and one-to-many. Another strategic dimension is what is it that you want to achieve. So when you're defining your ABM strategy, you have to sit down and agree with yourself. Do you want to grow your pipeline? Do you want to grow revenue, or do you want to do both? If you want to grow your pipeline because you have a strategic initiative saying we want to be bigger in this particular industry or in this vertical, it will be land. If you're selling more to existing key accounts, it's expand, and this will probably more likely drive revenue. As we all know, it's much easier to sell to existing clients. But in the real world, what we see is that companies choose a combination. So you have this, I want some deals, I want to sell more to my existing customers. I may be doing business with them in Germany, but not in France or what have you. So a combination of land and expand. So that's one dimension. And I would say what we're seeing right now is that companies that are starting out with ABM, they're going for one to few as a strategy. So a combination of one to few and land and expand as your strategic choices is probably the way forward for many of you. Before handing over to Peter, I just wanted to talk a little bit about how do you actually do it and how much time does it take. First of all, you'll notice we are saying ongoing 6 to 24 months. My view is that it's really important that you design your ABM in relationship to your customer journey. So if you have a customer journey that actually takes 2 years from initial outreach to you close the deal, then your ABM program should be 2 years. If it's shorter, you can design shorter programs. But again, bearing in mind that you have 95% of your customers are not in the market right now, you've got to respect that. And during the conference last week, no, sorry, not last week, but earlier this month, we talked about patience being a virtue. So typically we spend some time scoping and briefing. Then we do research into what keeps these customers awake at night. What are the key industry drivers? What are the pains? What are the challenges? And we relate that to your value proposition. And then we align between sales and marketing, as I talked about. Then we agree on the strategy. Is it one-to-one, one-to-few, or one-to-many? Is it land, expand, or combination? Then we select the customers, and if there are specific segments or verticals, we choose those, and then we start the actual development, the creative strategy, the go-to-market strategy. What's this campaign going to look like? We produce it, and then we go live and we optimize. And just a word on optimizing. From an ABM program, you get so much data if you do it right. You get an understanding of which customers interact with which messages, what of your advertising is working, what is not working, and what content is relevant, what's not relevant, and so on and so forth. So my recommendation would be to look at the data at least on a fortnightly basis, and once every 3 months you should go in and optimize your different marketing collaterals. I hope I've covered in a pretty short time a very, very big topic, account-based marketing. And now over to you, Peter, for how do you...
Thank you, Morten. So the Harvard Business Review recently published a report that talked about the reasons why enterprise deals are lost. And the reasons came down to basically three main reasons. And two of those reasons were around lack of relationship and the wrong style of messaging. My name is Peter, as Morten said, and I'm the managing partner of Big Business Agency. And I've been selling enterprise deals for the last 20 years. My three goals with this session are, firstly, to alert you to two critical aspects to do with selling and winning large enterprise deals. The second is to give you some tips and techniques on how you can cover those two risks. And thirdly, give you some idea about how you can put that into your normal deal review process. So if you have a look on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see a qualification framework. Now, there are different qualification frameworks. They can be called BAND, they can be called MEDIC, lots of different names, but they ostensibly do the same thing. And basically what they're designed to do is to step through all the parameters of a deal to make sure that you've covered off all the information, that you know enough about the deal to be able to win. And so good sales teams can give you and identify the solution. They can tell you the budget, in other words, M. They can give you a pretty good view of who the competition is, and they can give you a pretty good view of timing. But when you work with great sales teams, they can also include the parameters for the decision and access to the decision makers. So every element of that is important. So there are two key aspects we're going to cover off right now: why there is a deal in the first place and how the decision is going to be made. So in a compelling event, the why is covered by the compelling event. So there is a compelling event that's happening inside these big accounts. And if you don't know what the compelling event is, or you don't think there is a compelling event, you're actually not going to win, or there isn't going to be a deal awarded. So understanding what's driving the deal and why it is happening in the first place is incredibly important. So examples of compelling events are things like external compelling events can be things like changes in legislation, there can be changes in regulation, there can be debt covenants put on by external lenders. Some internal would be that you're looking to open into a new market, you're looking to launch a new product. There's a whole load of different reasons why your customer or your prospect would have a compelling event. And it's extremely important that you understand what that compelling event is. So let's have a look at some of the ways you can get at that information. So here's a list of questions. The questions are designed to figure out the history of the compelling event. So most organizations create compelling events are created in organizations when they're on the rise, in other words, they're growing, or when they're declining. Status quo, companies in status quo tend not to have big compelling events. When you're growing or declining, you have to do stuff. So the important thing is if you have a look at the last question, what's the genesis of this? How did it start? Who identified it? How did they champion it through the whole organizational process? How did it get priority? Managing a business and managing a corporation is balancing a whole range of different competing interests. So how did this particular opportunity or how did this particular project get to the top of the list? Who championed it? If you understand who and how it got through that process, you have an extremely good view of the importance of the compelling event. The other thing that's important to notice is once you understand the compelling event, you can begin to design your win themes and your unique selling proposition to the genesis and the evolution of the compelling event. And that gives you some strategic advantage. Yeah, I've written it here on the slide, but it says, if you don't know what the compelling event is, when the customer's issued a tender, if you think about the tender process, once the customer's issued a tender, they're actually at the end of their buying cycle. They've been through the genesis, they've worked it out internally, they figured out how they want to fix the solution, they've gone to market, they've spent money on a document, and then they've issued the document to the market. If issuing the document to the market is your first indication that there's a deal, you're probably not going to win the deal because you can't, usually under tender conditions, you can't go back and access all the decision makers. You can't go back and understand the genesis. And if you haven't led the customer through that process, it's going to be extremely hard to win. And I think if you went back and looked at all of the old tenders and cold tenders that you've done in the past, I think you'll find if you've won more than 1 in 30, I would be very, very surprised. So the end of their buying cycle really should not be the beginning of your sales cycle. It's my opinion. So let's have a look at the second critical aspect, and that is how the decision is going to be made. So there are three parts to this. There is the parameters for the decision, there's access to the decision makers, and then it's what our competition are doing. So in the parameters for the decision, there are really two parts to that. We want to make sure that we understand the formal criteria. Now, usually that's pretty easy. Someone says, the solution must do this or the solution must do that. It has to, have these attributes. The formal criteria is relatively easy to find out. It's the informal that we really struggle with. And it's the informal that makes great sales teams win big deals. So who's going to get fired if it doesn't work? Who's going to get promoted if it does work? How is the organization going to change if this is a success? So it's important to understand all those drivers in the background, because that's where all of the decision making is actually made. It's like a iceberg. What you can't see underneath is where it all happens. So that's the first thing, understanding the parameters for the decision, which gives us the P in our framework. Access to the decision makers. You can read an org chart, but the org charts don't give you the political map, and they don't give you who's the most powerful person in the room. They give you an org chart about who's got the highest job. So what we want to understand is who can say no. So there are plenty of people who can say no in a deal. I'll give you an example. We sell a lot of e-commerce solutions wrapped up, integrated inside HubSpot that integrate into ERPs. Our biggest decision maker who can say no is the IT department, because we need to conform with a certain number of standards, the security, etc. So we address them head on. We go and talk to them straight away, because we can cover off the issues that we have. So we know who says no in our sales. So you have to know who in your landscape can say yes, but more importantly, who can say no. And you need to cover off all of them, because if you don't, there'll be a quiet no somewhere and you won't know where it came from. The last thing is what your competition is doing. So you've got a coach, a champion, someone who can espouse your virtues when you're not there, someone who can help you maybe change the decision criteria so it's more favorable for your solution, someone who can espouse your win themes given the compelling event. So your competitor also will have a coach or a supporters. And what you need to understand is who is supporting your competitors? Why are they actually there? Why do they think they can win? And are their supporters more powerful than our supporters? And if they are, what can we do about it? So there's three levels of information that you need to be able to assess fully your ability to win a deal. So you've got to cover off the compelling event. You've got to understand the decision criteria and the access to the decision makers. And as I said there, it's much harder to win than it is to compete. So you plug all that into your current review. So you've gone through the solution, you've gone through a whole lot of questions. It's really important that you have a program for how you get at this information and how you get at each of these decision makers. And clearly, account-based marketing is a fabulous tool to be able to do that. But you can't do it in the light of a tender, because those decisions have already been made. So thank you very much. Thank you, Morten.
Thank you very much, Peter. Just to sum up, ABM is now seen as a growth enabler. Going for the big account with the big budgets makes sense from a financial perspective. We talked a little bit about how to activate these accounts, how to drive them into your funnel and select the best performing accounts. But that's one thing. The other thing is, as Peter talked about, how do you actually close the deal? And I think Peter has given some fascinating insights into what to do, what not to do, when to do it. And as a follow up on that, uh, Peter and I are inviting you to reach out, and we are offering you a free 1 hour online consultancy where we're using a tool which at the end of the session will provide you with the scoring of your where you are and the status on your readiness for account-based marketing and your deal handling capabilities. And that is no strings attached. If you reach out to me or to Peter afterwards, then we're very happy to do that on a first come, first served basis.
Yeah.
We Are we having any questions?
Well, there's just one more thing I forgot to say. The
Yeah,
third reason on that Harvard Business Review study was the lack of the risks associated with swapping out an incumbent. And clearly, you get over that by the value that you provide, the unique selling proposition. So I just forgot to mention that was the third reason why deals are lost.
right. And I think that's important that you don't waste time and resources on customers who are basically not interested or you already lost it. So I'm really glad, Peter, that you also talked about the fact that you've got to get in early. You've got to be there ahead of the tender.
Yeah.
So Peter, um, could you just elaborate because we had some questions coming from the audience ahead of this event. Why are cold tenders so hard to win?
Yeah, it's they make cold tenders have got a couple of attributes. One is that activity makes a lot of people feel comfortable. So there's bid teams put together, people fly in from everywhere. There's a bid manager appointed. There's a whole structure put in place, and people go and do a lot of stuff. And they answer questions, and they get a document, and they divide it into sections. A bit goes to legal, some goes to solution architects. All this sort of stuff. And a bit goes to executive management to write up, and everyone's really, really fascinated and happily busy.
Okay, thank you, Peter.
But
The second question I have is, what would qualifying out do to my sales reputation? I think it's a good question because I think a lot of people are afraid of walking away from the deal. But what's your take on that?
Well, I think it enhances your capability. It costs 9 times more to come second than it does to qualify out early. So if you think about the progression of a deal through the pipeline, if you don't know all the elements of the deal, you shouldn't be taking your organization into what becomes an incredibly expensive exercise. So if you've got the wherewithal to call the fact that you can't replace the incumbent, you can't bump the competitors, the decision criteria was set by your competitor and you can't change it, that's a mature business call that should get you a lot of kudos. Running a tender process and running a procurement process that you're going to come second, third, or fourth on, that is not a good use of your company's resources. And given how tight everything is in 2024, I would think your sales reputation is enhanced by your ability to qualify correctly, be that in or out.
So better say closed, lost, and on your
Move
way.
on.
Yeah,
Move on.
yeah. Final question I have for you: how do we get close enough to the customer to understand the informal decision criteria? I think that's a relevant one.
Yeah, the informal criteria comes mostly from relationship, and it comes from the whole idea that you're there to understand the customer's issue, the customer's problem, and the customer's problem is not just what they want done; it's how they want it done, the effect it will have. So each element of a deal and each element of a solution is not only just what the solution is, but it's what it does to the organization. It's what it does to the people in the organization. And so the informal criteria comes from a relationship, and it comes from a genuine understanding and care for the people who will be affected by the decision that's made. And if you can understand that, then you can champion their needs through the whole process and ultimately to win.
Okay, great. Thank you, Peter. Do we have any further questions?
Yeah, we've got a couple for you.
Yeah,
First one I got here is how do you get started with ABM?
that's a very good question. Um, I would recommend that sales and marketing sit together, that you look at your budgets, and I think it's highly relevant. We're in November now. Everybody's doing budgets, so you're looking at your budgets, you're looking at your targets for next year. Where's the business going to come from? How much of it is coming from your current customers? How much is net new business? So sit down, look at your targets and the objectives and the overall strategy of your company, and get sales and marketing aligned. That would be my first step.
Yeah, brilliant. There's two others here. One is they're both related to investment. So one is someone's asked, how do you calculate ROI? And then the second question they've asked is, how much does it cost?
Yeah, that's
They're good questions.
good questions. Thanks, Peter, and thank you to the ones who provided these questions. How do you determine the ROI? You of course you look at the expected expenditure, and you look at the probability of the outcome. So how much revenue are you going to generate? How much is your pipeline going to be valued at? And you will have different stages of your pipeline. So obviously people or accounts at the top of the pipeline do not represent such a big value, but as you progress down to the pipeline, the probability increases, and therefore the value of the pipeline also increases. So it's really total costs up against expected revenue. The second one question was, I believe, Peter, how much does it cost? Which is I sometimes answer that by saying how much does a house cost or how much does a car cost. But basically, there are a number of parameters that you have to factor in. First of all, how many accounts are you interested in pursuing? What is the duration of the program? Are we talking about a 6-month program, or do you have a highly complicated buying journey with lots of decision makers, and it takes up to 2 years? Probably be more expensive than a short 6 months program. And another important part is content. A lot of companies have a lot of content that may have to be curated and personalized to the individual account. So that's a factor you have to cost in. And actually, just looking at our ABM potential analysis, these are some of the questions that we will cover in the workshop if you're interested. But to be more specific and not waffle, I would think that from around, depending with all these, how many accounts, how long time, I would say between or from 50,000 euros and upwards, you can do a solid program. But you see programs that are much more expensive, and I guess it's also back to the issue about how much does a house cost you, and how many bathrooms do you need, and how many bedrooms, and so on. So thank you, Peter, for those great questions.
No problem.
So final question is just a big thank you from Peter and myself. Please link with us and please reach out to us. We will share the presentation, and as I said, it's also being recorded. I hope it's been an inspiration. I'm looking forward to talking to you soon again. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye, Peter. Bye, everyone.